Friends, welcome to the Manuscript Papua YouTube channel. Selamat datang di channel YouTube Manuscript Papua.
Isu geopolitik kembali mencuat di kawasan Indo-Pasifik setelah situs militer ternama asal Amerika Serikat Janes melaporkan bahwa Rusia dikabarkan telah mengajukan permintaan kepada Indonesia untuk menempatkan pesawat militer jarak jauh di pangkalan Angkatan Udara Manuhua, Biak, Papua. Laporan ini langsung mendapat sorotan internasional, terutama dari Australia, yang memiliki kepentingan strategis di kawasan tersebut. Kehadiran militer asing di Papua dalam bentuk apapun akan selalu bertentangan dengan cita-cita kemerdekaan. Sebab perjuangan rakyat Papua bukan untuk menjadi pion dalam catur geopolitik, melainkan untuk berdiri sebagai bangsa yang merdeka, bermartabat, dan berdaulat atas tanah airnya sendiri. Selain itu, Papua, khususnya Biak, bisa berubah dari wilayah strategis yang tenang menjadi titik panas baru yang berisiko menjadi sasaran dalam setiap konflik antara kekuatan besar. Penduduk lokal akan terpapar risiko keamanan, dan proyek-proyek pembangunan di kawasan timur Indonesia bisa terhambat oleh ketidakstabilan geopolitik. Jika skenario ini menjadi kenyataan, dampaknya bukan hanya soal militer, tapi juga reputasi, posisi Indonesia di mata dunia, dan masa depan stabilitas kawasan Asia-Pasifik secara keseluruhan. Di sisi lain, bagi para pejuang Papua Merdeka, jika benar Rusia berhasil menempatkan kekuatan militernya di Biak, Papua, maka ini akan menjadi babak baru dalam sejarah perjuangan kemerdekaan bangsa Papua. Di mata rakyat Papua yang memperjuangkan kemerdekaan, kehadiran militer asing ini bisa jadi ini akan dipandang sebagai bentuk baru dari penjajahan di atas tanah mereka. Pemerintah Indonesia kemungkinan besar akan memperketat kontrol militer di Papua dengan alasan menjaga kerjasama strategis. Namun bagi rakyat Papua, ini hanya akan memperpanjang penderitaan yang sudah terjadi selama puluhan tahun. Pembungkaman suara, pelanggaran HAM, dan hilangnya kedaulatan atas tanah leluhur. Namun dinamika ini juga bisa membuka peluang baru di panggung internasional. Dunia mungkin mulai melihat bahwa persoalan Papua bukan lagi sekadar konflik dalam negeri Indonesia, melainkan bagian dari tarikan kekuatan global di kawasan Pasifik. Perjuangan Papua untuk merdeka akan mendapatkan dimensi baru, sebagai suara dari sebuah bangsa yang terjepit di antara ambisi negara-negara besar. Tetapi, tantangan juga akan datang dari dalam. Ketika kekuatan asing mulai berkepentingan di tanah Papua, ada risiko perpecahan arah dalam tubuh gerakan kemerdekaan itu sendiri. Beberapa mungkin tergoda untuk berkompromi dengan kekuatan luar, sementara yang lain tetap memegang teguh prinsip perjuangan sejati. Papua merdeka sepenuhnya, tanpa campur tangan siapapun. Di tengah semua ini, rakyat Papua tetap menjadi korban terbesar. Saat kekuatan militer, entah dari Jakarta atau Moskow, hadir di tanah Papua, yang paling terdampak adalah masyarakat sipil. Petani, nelayan, mama-mama pasar, dan generasi muda yang mendambakan masa depan merdeka. Kehadiran militer asing di Papua, dalam bentuk apapun, akan selalu bertentangan dengan cita-cita kemerdekaan. Sebab perjuangan rakyat Papua bukan untuk menjadi pion dalam catur geopolitik, melainkan untuk berdiri sebagai bangsa yang merdeka, bermartabat, dan berdaulat atas tanah airnya sendiri. Perdana Menteri Australia, Anthony Albanese, menanggapi serius laporan ini dan menyatakan bahwa pemerintahnya sedang mencari klarifikasi resmi dari pemerintah Indonesia. Albanese menekankan pentingnya menjaga stabilitas kawasan dan menghindari eskalasi kekuatan militer asing di wilayah yang dekat dengan Australia. Sementara itu, pemimpin oposisi Australia, Peter Dutton, awalnya mengkritik pemerintahan Albanese dan menyebut bahwa Presiden Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto, telah mengonfirmasi permintaan Rusia tersebut. Namun, pernyataannya segera dikoreksi setelah diketahui bahwa tidak ada konfirmasi semacam itu dari Prabowo secara langsung. Dutton kemudian mengakui kekeliruannya dan menyatakan bahwa yang ia maksud adalah pemerintahan Prabowo, bukan sang presiden secara pribadi. Menanggapi rumor yang beredar, Kementerian Pertahanan Indonesia secara tegas membantah laporan tersebut. Mereka menyatakan bahwa tidak ada rencana atau pembicaraan terkait penempatan pesawat militer Rusia di wilayah Indonesia, dan informasi yang tersebar tidak sesuai dengan fakta. Situasi ini menjadi perhatian besar di tengah kampanye politik dalam negeri Australia, di mana isu keamanan nasional dan hubungan luar negeri menjadi fokus utama. Ketegangan ini menunjukkan betapa sensitifnya dinamika geopolitik regional dan pentingnya komunikasi diplomatik yang jelas antar negara. Jika Rusia berhasil menempatkan pesawat militer jarak jauh di pangkalan Angkatan Udara Manuhua di Biak, Papua, dunia akan menyaksikan perubahan besar dalam dinamika strategis Indo-Pasifik. Langkah ini akan menandai titik balik bersejarah dalam hubungan militer global, sekaligus mengguncang fondasi diplomatik Indonesia yang selama ini dikenal dengan prinsip bebas aktif. Kehadiran militer Rusia di Indonesia akan memberikan Moskow pijakan strategis yang sangat berharga di wilayah selatan Pasifik, tepat di ambang pintu Australia. Rusia akan mampu memproyeksikan kekuatan dan memantau aktivitas militer serta maritim di seluruh kawasan Asia Tenggara hingga Australia, sesuatu yang belum pernah terjadi sebelumnya sejak era Perang Dingin. Bagi Australia, Amerika Serikat, dan sekutu-sekutunya, langkah ini tidak akan dianggap sebagai hal sepele. Mereka hampir pasti akan memandangnya sebagai ancaman langsung terhadap stabilitas kawasan dan keamanan nasional mereka. Respons bisa datang dalam bentuk peningkatan kehadiran militer di kawasan, perluasan aliansi seperti AUKUS, atau bahkan tekanan diplomatik dan ekonomi terhadap Indonesia. Di dalam negeri, Indonesia akan menghadapi dilema besar. Pemerintah akan mendapat tekanan dari masyarakat sipil dan kelompok oposisi yang mempertanyakan arah kebijakan luar negeri. Keputusan semacam ini dapat dinilai sebagai pelanggaran terhadap prinsip kedaulatan dan netralitas yang menjadi dasar politik luar negeri Indonesia sejak kemerdekaan. Teman-teman, jangan lupa untuk memberikan komentar positif dan salam hormat dari channel YouTube Manuskrip Papua.
Manuskrip Papua.
Get ready for the countdown. 3, 2, 1.
A US military website has reported that Moscow has asked Indonesia to allow Russian long-range aircraft to be based in Papua. The Defence Minister has confirmed Australia has been in contact with Indonesia to work out if Russia has asked to base the aircraft at Indonesia's Air Force Base there. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts is in Parliament House for us. Hi there, Stephen. So what do we know about this request?
Well, the truth is right now we know very little for certain, Mel. What we do know is that the US military website Jane's, which is quite authoritative, has reported that it's got documents which prove that Russia has lodged an official request with Jakarta to give it permission to use an Air Force base in Papua province, that's in the far east of Indonesia, of course, not far from Papua New Guinea, to use that military base to deploy and base its long-range aircraft. Now, to be clear, Indonesia, by all accounts, has not yet responded to this reported request. But unsurprisingly, the prospect of both of Russia, a country which remains very hostile to Australia and which has been very destructive in the international scene over the last few years, the prospect of them hosting long-range aircraft so close to Australia's northern approaches is one that would be deeply troubling to the Australian government. So both the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, were pressed about this on the campaign trail this afternoon. Both of them seemed to indicate that Australia had not been able to confirm yet either way whether this reported request had in fact been lodged, but they said senior Australian officials had been in touch with their counterparts in Jakarta to try and clarify exactly what the request was, when it was made, and how Indonesia was likely to respond. Let's take a listen to both the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, speaking about this earlier today.
I'm aware of the reports and I can be clear that we as a government have reached out to confirm those reports and to understand whether or not those reports are accurate and what the status of those requests from Russia are. As you know, Russia is engaging in an illegal and immoral war against Ukraine, and you would know that the Australian government has imposed a great many sanctions on Russia and continues to provide both military and humanitarian support.
We have a very close relationship with Indonesia. We have a growing defence relationship with Indonesia. We have already been engaged with Indonesia on this request. I'd note that at this point Indonesia has not responded to this request. We will keep engaging with Indonesia in a way which befits a very close friend and a very close friendship between our two countries. We have been very focused on developing our bilateral relationship with Indonesia, including our bilateral defence relationship with Indonesia. Last year, we signed a defence cooperation agreement with Indonesia, which really is the deepest level defence agreement we've ever had with Indonesia. And we are seeing increasing cooperation between Australia and Indonesia at a defence level, and I expect all of that to continue. In respect of this particular issue, we are already engaging with Indonesia at a senior level and will continue to do so about the request.
So, Stephen, has there been any response from Indonesia?
Not really at this stage. All of the government departments that the ABC has contacted in Jakarta have simply said they have no information at this stage, and some people in the broader government bureaucracy don't seem to be aware of this reported request whatsoever. That in itself is not necessarily a tell of anything, because sometimes requests like this, particularly ones that are particularly sensitive, are pretty tightly held. In other words, they don't get seen by many people. In Jakarta, it may be that only senior officials, officers and politicians are aware of this request. That's assuming that it has in fact been been lodged. But obviously the fact that you've now got senior representations from Australia, from officials, asking for more information, and the fact you've had the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Defence Minister, all wading into this issue publicly here in Australia, it's likely to be a bit of a spur in the Indonesian system. I imagine we will get something a little bit more definitive down the track. Those people I've spoken to, Mel, in Jakarta already, who don't themselves have any direct knowledge of what's happening here, say privately that they don't believe that it's likely that Indonesia would grant this request. They say it would be very disruptive and it would go against the grain of Indonesia's foreign policy principles. So they're playing down the chances of Indonesia ever saying yes to this. But it is just worth noting that in some ways Moscow and Jakarta have drawn closer since Prabowo took power last year. We've seen, for example, joint military drills between the two, or joint naval drills rather, in November last year. We've seen quite a bit of high-level contact. You've seen senior Russian officials visiting Jakarta just a couple of months ago. So all of this means that Australia will want to get a pretty cast-iron assurance from Jakarta pretty quickly that this request, assuming it has in fact been lodged, that this request will get very short shrift from the government in Indonesia.
And this is, of course, quickly becoming a campaign issue.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, both the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and the Opposition Leader, Peter Dutton, have both fielded questions on this, quite a few questions in the Prime Minister's case. The Opposition Leader, Peter Dutton, says that it would be a very, very serious indictment of the Albanese government if it was taken unawares by this report. He said it would be a catastrophic failure of diplomacy if Australia wasn't aware of this request before it was broken by the Jane's newsletter when it came out earlier today. As for Anthony Albanese, he says it's time to remain calm. He says he wants to try and engage diplomatically on this issue, and he doesn't want to engage in speculation about what may or may not be true, simply saying that Australian officials have reached out to try and clarify exactly what's going on. Let's take a listen to what both leaders had to say.
This would be a catastrophic failure of diplomatic relations if Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese didn't have forewarning about this before it was made public. This is a very, very troubling development, and suggestion that somehow Russia would have some of their assets based in Indonesia, only a short distance from obviously the north of our country. We need to make sure that the government explains exactly what has happened here. Did the Prime Minister know about this before it was publicly announced by the President of Indonesia? And what is the government's response to it?
Well, what we're seeking is proper clarification. That's the way you deal with international relations. Making sure that you're not flying from the hip. What we didn't do when the United States made its decision on tariffs was question our defence relationship with the United States. It took John Howard to intervene, to point out to Peter Dutton that that wasn't appropriate. We'll respond in an appropriate way with our friends in Indonesia. We are seeking further information. We obviously do not want to see Russian influence in our region.
So obviously, Mel, this story probably has a fair way to run, and I suspect it might, at least to a degree, shape the campaign over the next couple of days at least.
No doubt a lot more to come on this one. Stephen Jedget's in Canberra there for us. Thank you.
Teman-teman, terima kasih banyak telah menyaksikan siaran di channel YouTube Manuskrip Papua. Kami sangat menghargai setiap dukungan yang kalian berikan. Tanpa kalian, perjalanan channel ini tidak akan terasa seistimewa ini. Salam dan hormat dari YouTuber Manuskrip Papua.
Manuskrip Papua.